Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Derrick Smith. I'm with Datanational Corporation, and thanks for attending our webinar this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about the building blocks for disaster recovery. We have a very special guest with us today from AAA Life Insurance, Randy Wittner. Randy, how's it going?
Good, Derrick. Thank you.
Great. So Randy's here today to help us guide us through some of the material that we have on deck for the presentation. Randy is part of the AAA Life Insurance team, and he was part of the process in establishing their current disaster recovery strategy at AAA Life. So Randy was part of the team there, and they have a pretty sophisticated disaster recovery solution. And as we go through our content and the presentation today, Randy's going to be sharing his experiences and some of the resources that he tapped into in going through their process. Once again, my name is Derrick Smith. I'm part of our business continuity team here at Datanational, and my role with our organization is to help customers design and come up with really the best business continuity approach for their business. So we appreciate everyone taking the time this afternoon to spend the next 30 to 45 minutes with us and walking through this. So before I get started here, as I switch slides, so just some housekeeping notes here. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the control panel on the right-hand side. There should be a text box there where you can key in questions and submit those at any time. We'll be checking for questions throughout the presentation, and we'll make one final pass at the end to address any questions that you may have. So feel free to fire away as we get involved in some of the material. If you have any questions that are slightly off topic that you still want to have us address, Randy is a great resource to have from an end user standpoint. So this would be a great opportunity to address some of those questions based on his experience. We're expecting this to go about 35 to 45 minutes long, and we'll have a QA discussion after. And one of the things that we'd like to do for everybody is, for everyone who's able to participate in today's call, we're going to provide a sample disaster recovery assessment form. So this has been a real helpful little, it's really a spreadsheet, and it's been extremely helpful for a lot of our customers, get them started and be organized as they collect the information they need in terms of understanding the requirements. It allows you to organize things by category in terms of databases, application structures, arrange things by recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. So it's a nice little tool to have. So I would like to share that with everybody. I know Randy used something similar to that in going through their exercise. So that's something that we will follow up here in the next couple days for everyone. Okay, so getting started. 5 keys for disaster recovery success. So what I'm going to do is talk about these at a high level, and then as I go through, as Randy and I go through the materials, we'll touch upon these in a lot more detail. So I have 5 different keys here that I have seen as, from a consultant perspective, be very successful and get customers on the right path in terms of understanding their needs and putting something in place that is going to be the appropriate level of protection for their business. So one of the things is number 1, and it's one that not a lot of companies think about, but we have seen it be very beneficial, is to, I have here, people, policies, and priorities first. And what this means is this is a fancy term for really creating a group or a committee that is responsible for influencing this decision. So as Randy will talk later in the presentation, and it's important to get the business involved, because usually these types of requirements are dictated from the business and pushed down the IT, with IT being the sole driver of getting that implemented. But what we've seen is, if you have a group of individuals that is responsible for making this decision, it puts everyone in the same loop. So if you include some major department areas, for example, if you include someone from sales, include if you're on the manufacturing side, if you include someone that's responsible for the manufacturing or warehouse responsibilities, maybe someone from finance. It's important for these folks to understand what their job is going to look like in event of an outage. So, you know, for example, the person that's responsible for sales, what is his team has access to or don't have access to in an outage? You know, so what does their roles look like? Do they have some manual things that they can do? So it's important to understand, it's important for all these different aspects of the organization to know what their role is going to be in an outage and what they can and cannot do in terms of their job responsibilities. And more importantly, what we've seen also is to include some of the higher levels of management. So a lot of these people that you're including in these discussions may not be, you know, providing a ton of feedback in terms of the technical aspects of the solution, but it's important for everyone to be on the same page in terms of what is really put in place. A lot of times when we sit down with customers and we meet with different groups, so we meet with IT, we meet some of the upper management folks, there's typically a disconnect on what is actually in place or what the requirements are. So we've seen it as very disparate where you know, we meet with upper management and they think they have, you know, if we have an outage, we have a 24-hour RTO. So we're going to be able to get all of our systems up in 24 hours, get users connected, and we're going to be back up and going. And in that same organization, we'll meet with IT, and their response is very different. You know, their response may be, yeah, you know, we've been asking for money for DR, and we get, you know, not what we budgeted for. So the best thing that we can do is we're going to be contacting, you know, some of our solution providers, and they're going to be shipping new equipment out to us, and we're looking at a 4 to 7 day RTO. So we've seen it be that different. So this has been a very helpful thing. Even if you're a smaller organization, it's still good to include a couple folks in that conversation to keep everyone in the loop, and we've found that to be very successful. The second point that we'll talk about as well is getting data out of the building. So this seems to be common sense, and right. So this is more of how you're doing it. Doing this in a manner where it is cost-effective, efficient, and also secure. So the days of carrying tapes out of the building, you know, either using a third-party service provider to do that, or having an employee do that, storing data in an employee's home or basement or trunks of cars, they're just not following best practices around data protection. So we'll be talking a lot about that later in the presentation, is doing this in the most cost-effective way. There's so many vaulting technologies today that offer to do this process very efficiently and very securely. Just a matter of finding one that is going to meet your needs. Thirdly, the cost of data loss and downtime. So this is extremely important because this is how you're going to cost justify what you put in place. So without this information, it's going to be very difficult to talk with the upper folks, the upper management, to really determine what makes sense for your organization. So a lot of times if we sit down with a company, they can pretty much tell us what it's going to cost them, or have a good idea of what it's going to cost them to be down. And you know, we're here in Detroit, Michigan, so we work very closely with a lot of customers who have just-in-time environments. So in those type of environments, it's, you know, it's pretty straightforward. They're measured in the matter of minutes that their product, if their product is not on their customer's dock or receiving doors, they are fined by the minute, which is a pretty steep cost and can add up very quickly. So in those types of environments, you know, it's very obvious what those costs are. But this is important because as you look at my number 5, they kind of go hand in hand because you're going to need that cost of downtime to really justify the right level of protection. So we'll go through that as we go through the presentation here. Is, you know, be able to use those numbers to properly position the right level of protection based on what you're able to justify from the business. So we'll talk a lot more about that here shortly. Thinking beyond tape. So as you'll hear in my voice and how I present things, we're not big proponents of tape at all. We just think that it's still a very supported backup and archival technology, and it actually continues to improve with larger capacity and speed. But just in its nature, it has so much inherent risk in terms of requiring manual intervention to get that tape off site. It offers very limited accessibility in terms of recovery standpoint. So we just think that there's better ways to approach things in terms of recoverability, and we'll touch base on that as well. Okay, so first steps here, getting started. So if you're in the shoes of, okay, you've been tasked to either redesign what you have or potentially start brand new, fresh, and you're looking for some place to start, this is where we recommend that you start out at. So this is you really, what I say, doing your homework first before you rush out and start heading to the marketplace. And this is really stepping back and taking a look at your applications and going through a ranking process and classifying your system. So what we tell our customers to do, and I think Randy did this at AAA in some form or fashion, but to come up with a tier process. And the way this works is that we have customers that will sit down and set up different tiers, and they're really different categories. So your tier 1 is your mission critical applications. It's your systems that provide the most value to your organization. So you're going to place those in your tier 1. And you're going to rank these tiers by recovery point objective and RTOs. So you're going to have an RTO of, for example, your tier 1 may have an RTO of 30 minutes or less and an RPO of near 0. So those are your critical applications that you're going to place in tier 1, and then you take that down to tier 2. You're going to be looking at anything from 30 minutes to a 4-hour window would be tier 2. Tier 3 would be 4 hours to 12 hours. So you get the point. And sometimes the categories or the requirements are different. So if you're not in a mission critical environment or in a market that you have exposure to downtime that's very costly, so your tier 1 might be 24 hours or less, and your tier 2 might be 36 hours or less. So whatever makes sense for your business, that's how you kind of categorize things. So this has been extremely helpful, and that form that we're going to be sending out will give you a nice start or a good template. You can move that and doctor it any way that you want, but it would be a good template for you to use as you go through this process. And I have there document the cost of not meeting SLAs. So I kind of touched on that already. So what a lot of times customers can do, they'll actually get very granular in how they determine these costs. And on that spreadsheet that you're going to be getting, they'll make a separate column and say, downtime costs. And in there, they can tie the specific cost down to the application. So if their ERP system is down, they know it's going to cost them X amount of dollars per hour or per 15-minute intervals, or however they want to break that apart that makes sense for the business. So that's extremely helpful. And this is where we've seen customers really do their homework, and this really gives you the information to know what questions to ask when you go out there in the marketplace, because it is a very noisy marketplace in terms of DR and business continuity. So if you don't do your homework and you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you're going to be spinning your wheels and invest time that you'll feel later on down the road. You may have invested a lot of time in looking at a particular strategy or solution and find out, 8-10 hours into that research, it's not going to be a good fit. So Randy, I'll let you jump in here on your strategy and what you guys did in terms of understanding needs and and how you went about putting different levels of protection in for your environment.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about a few things you talked about as well. I mean, I know you got a slide about RTO and RPO, so you'll explain those better to the users out there, but you really got to add those two together to see your total loss of time and data. Also, you talked about, IT driving this, and IT can drive it and probably will have to, but the business needs to be fully engaged and willing to work on this with you.
Right on.
Yeah. Also, it's an important thing to think about having more than one copy of your data, more than one copy of the backup for your business, because one could get corrupted. It's also important to test those backups or copies or high availability solutions that you have in place. And,
right. I know you guys invest a lot of time in testing. Can you maybe talk about that? I know in particular you've tested a lot. I don't know. Maybe you can share with everybody what you guys are.
Normally testing about 3 times a year, where we do role swaps and bring up our critical applications. In the future, we'll be trying to bring up every application. But for the time being, we've been concentrating on working out all the kinks to get all of our most critical applications up. The highest critical applications, like the Tier 1, we try to get up in 4 to 5 hours. The less critical are maybe 12 to 15 hours, and then so on, 24 hours, 48 hours. Now, our most critical application is the environment I work on, the IBM I, and that one we do have real-time replication, so we can bring that up with current data within 20 minutes. But we have other work to do at that point to get everything functioning with all the other Windows and Linux and other applications, and then to get all the licensing squared out as well. Because some things we buy because they're critical. We buy an extra license for that HADR type box. Some of them we just call the vendors and say we need to get a temporary license while we're using this backup machine. Just for cost reasons, things that aren't as critical we don't want to pay for up front like that. Another thing to think about when you're planning your DR strategy is, in ever-evolving IT department like we have here, we put in new applications fairly frequently, and you should think about how you're going to recover those when you're picking your solution. Just like nowadays, you have to think about how is it going to be secure, how's it going to pass those regulations. So you should think about it from a backup and the recovery point of view as well.
Well, that's a good point, as opposed to being an afterthought where you're shopping for a software-based solution. That's part of your criteria up front, is saying, okay, what's the recoverability of this?
Yep, yeah, and what tiers will it fall in for us? How important will it be for us to recover it quickly?
Right. Great, that's good feedback. Thanks, Randy.
Yep.
Okay. So, as Randy, I've dropped these abbreviations a lot, and I thought maybe it'd be good to review this. I know a lot of you may be aware of these. So, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, RTO, and RPO. So basically what I have here is really an illustration of that shows you the difference and what really they mean to your business. Because a lot of times there's so much focus on RTO that people forget about the data protection side of things until you really bring it up and you have them go through the process of what it's going to mean for them to lose data. Do they have the process to recreate transactions? What does that mean for them? Is that having customers resend orders? Is that missing broadcasts from maybe a supplier? So a lot of times that's forgotten. So what I have here is a quick illustration to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because we'll continue to talk about RPO and RTO. And as you mentioned, Randy mentioned in his comments that that's really the driving forces in determining what level of protection you need to put across the different systems of your environment. So what I have here in this illustration is I have backups being done at midnight, and in this specific example, this is a tape-based backup. This could be some type of a disk-to-disk architecture as well, but for this example here, I use a tape-based strategy. So this customer is performing backups at 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day, or excuse me, midnight every day. And this particular afternoon, they have an outage at 3 o'clock. So you kind of take a look at, okay, how old is my data that's been saved? You know, so depending on that outage, so if it's something like a disk controller cache or a battery cache or something like that, you know, more times than not, you're not going to lose data. You might be down, or you may have some degraded performance for a while, but you're not going to lose any data. Now, if you have some type of corrupt database or you know, something more catastrophic that happened to your building or your facility, you know, you may be looking at some data loss. In this specific example, we have 15 hours. And then a lot of times what we see from a tape-based backup is customers who are still using tape, they're not really exercising, you know, what the proper maintenance on those tapes. They're being reused over and over again for many years. They're not being recycled, and when they actually have to go to restore something, they find out that that tape is not readable. They can't get any data off of it, or there's objects or data that is corrupt on it. So what we find is, unfortunately, customers have to go back to the previous night's save. So RPO is that measurement of what you can justify, how much data you can justify losing in an outage. So a lot of times what we're doing is we're taking solutions that provide real-time replication in between these points to avoid any data loss. And that's what Randy has mentioned in his on their IBM mid-range system. IBM I is their one of their mission critical applications. So they're replicating in real time over to a secondary system to avoid any data loss. And then the flip side of this is one that's everyone's familiar with, recovery time, RTO. So, you know, how long is it going to take you to recover from that outage? What does that mean? So my battery cache scenario where, you know, you've got to have a system engineer come out and replace that battery, make sure you flush the cache and do all that. You know, what is that, a 4 to 6 hour turnaround time maybe? If it's something more catastrophic, maybe you're implementing, you're going to a DR strategy or DR plan and recovering at a recovery center or something along those lines. So this is, between these two benchmarks, that kind of drives everything. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page for folks that may have not heard those terms before or put in the way that we're kind of emphasizing them. Okay, understanding downtime availability. So basically two types of downtime, unplanned and planned. Believe it or not, the majority of downtime is planned. Okay, so there's been a lot of research on this, and Gartner has done a lot of research on this specifically, and what we learn is that 5 to 10% of all downtime is unplanned. So the balance of that, which is the majority, is routine maintenance and planned downtime. So this is where you're having to perform operating system upgrades, maybe firmware upgrades, replacing disk drives, just your regular routine maintenance that you need to do for the natural care and feeding of your environment. So if you are in an environment that's 24/7, 365, and don't have these windows, don't have holidays to have the luxury of doing that type of maintenance on your primary systems, then that's an area where you look at maybe having some redundancy built in. We're able to fail over to a secondary instance where you can keep users connected, keep that uptime availability for your user community, and be able to perform that maintenance and easily fail back and forth, right? So that's a typical scenario. The unfortunate scenarios are, you know, that 5 to 10%, which we've seen a whole wide range of things happen that you would typically not think of when it comes to having an outage. But the interesting fact that I put there is 80% of all unplanned downtime is due to people or process problems. So this is the misconfiguration of a software, or maybe the lack of monitoring a system where a system gets completely used on disk and the system fails. So that is a big thing. I know that Randy will kind of talk about in terms of what specifically they were looking for in terms of protection and trying to stay away certain types of trying to avoid certain types of downtime. I have there on hardware failures, and this is not so much, you always think of server crashes and having problems with your network, or a SAN having problems with your SAN fabric or something like that. I've seen hardware failures be more mechanical, like literally the data center mechanics, where we had one scenario where a customer's air conditioning or their chiller unit failed in the middle of the night, and their data centers, server by server, started to slowly crash because the temperature in their data center got so hot that they were starting to have these systems fail and needed to declare an outage. And their data center was fine, their buildings were fine. From the application, there was nothing wrong with the applications. As the environment got so hot, and come to find out they weren't doing general maintenance on some of those things in their data center. So that was more of a maintenance thing on some of the data center mechanics. So Randy, I know when you guys were kind of focused in on, and okay, what do we need to be prepared for? What do we need to kind of focus in on? What do we want to avoid? I know there were some specific things in your list that you guys were looking to avoid as a team.
Yeah, getting the critical systems up as fast as possible, of course. One, we were part of the brownout back in 2004 or so, and we were down for days because of that. So the company put in a rather large kerosene type generator. So now when we have power outages in this building, we are still functional 100%. Concerns I have is we're in a building with many other companies and even a movie theater and some stores. So if a fire happens in one of these other companies or businesses, it could affect us, or it could affect our data center. So you have those concerns of a DR really happening out of your control. Derrick, you mentioned a few other reasons. You could have a disaster. You could have a disaster because you made programming changes and they were incorrect, and your data got affected from that. That's why when we make changes, I usually shut off the replication, so my backup machine is still good, because you wouldn't want to corrupt machines. You could have a malicious employee destroy data. At least at that point you have to recover, but you probably wouldn't recover to another machine, but you would recover to your same machine. That's still part of disaster recovery.
Right.
So you have things like that. You have data center concerns, like I mentioned before, the licensing concerns that are on the screen right there on that slide. Which ones are critical you might want to pay for, which ones can take, you can have a few hours where you can call vendors and get the licenses and get those up and running. And that's about it. That's great. So and I have a lot of customers that focus in on power grids. So they want to have wherever their secondary systems reside, or their backups, or whatever they deem as their DR location. Customers now want to be on completely different power grids. So that's another big one for customers in terms of redundant networking and all that as well.
Yep. Right. Well, good. Okay. Signs that downtime may be a threat. So these are kind of indicators that kind of jump out at you. So, we have seen customers, it's not been a project on their list. It's kind of a nice to have, and then they slowly start seeing some of these indicators pop up in their everyday work. And one of those, the first one here is shrinking backup windows. This is probably the most popular one that I've seen over the last year or two. And I would say, a good portion of our projects that we're working on with our clients have been exactly this, where the customers have been used to having a backup window to get, all their users off the system, perform backups, and have plenty of time to properly back up their data and have their systems ready for the users. Where now, that window, what used to be 8 to 12 hours of nice to have time where they could do certain things like that, that has been slowly shrinking, and for a lot of our customers have just flat out disappeared. So they no longer have that window, where now they're looking at options to offload their backups to a secondary system or a target system, so just so they can keep their systems up and available for their user community. So there's other things that, depending on what that window looks like, you could look at maybe a backup solution that is a little more automated, that has some stable active capability, that uses compression and deduplication. That all that stuff helps in terms of making your backups more efficient. But that is a key indicator that you need to be prepared for some type of solution or strategy that is going to offload your backups, whether that's a replication strategy or some type of vaulting technique that you're doing there, or maybe depending on some of these SANs now have specific things with flash copy, where you're doing SAN-to-SAN replication, and so those are the types of tools that are available to you to help kind of avoid that. The next one is that I'll talk to is the server consolidation. So this is another big one that we're seeing as well, and I think a lot of this has to do with customers being a lot more comfortable with virtualization these days. Where 10 years ago, you had some of the braver companies, take that leap and really embrace virtualization. And slowly but surely, you had some customers, start out with specific areas of their company they would virtualize, and then slowly but surely become virtualized. So more and more now, customers are a lot more comfortable with it. So where they had maybe 15, 20 physical servers running applications, they may be down to 3 or 4 systems now running those applications. So you may have 5 or 6 systems now running hundreds of virtual servers and some shared storage. So what that means is now you have fewer systems, or a lot more applications running on fewer hardware. So you have some risk there. So if you had a system fail or a SAN fail, you got a lot riding now on that infrastructure. So customers are seeing the light there in terms of, okay, we need to put ourselves in a better position from a DR perspective. So we're going to start looking at some type of approach that's going to help us. So that is a key indicator. So if you're using Hyper-V or VMware, if you're an iSeries account where you're using Power VM with logical partitioning, those are the types of things that, okay, you need to be aware of. And there's lots of tools and technologies in all those different categories that can help you very easily provide some redundancy and some replication. And in the middle one there, global systems and computing, this has been kind of an ongoing one for many, many years now. So it's just to the point where users, customers just expect systems to be available. So, the one that pops up in my head is email. So for some organizations, if email is down, it is a major, major issue. So everyone relies on email. There's applications that are now tightly integrated with email. So, customers and your users just expect for those systems to be up, because that's critical data that's going up to those. So a lot of times, customers are having to figure out what type of protection you put on some of these systems that serve not only your internal users, but also your customers that interface with customer suppliers and so forth. So Randy, I know that you guys had some threats at AAA Life that you wanted to approach, and I think shrinking backup window was one of them. I don't know if you want to share some thoughts on this and what your goals were here.
Yeah, so the business basically came to me and needed more uptime for that second point on the slide. Our website, we have customers pay bills, get quotes, things like that, and a lot of that communicates with our iSeries, because all of our policy data is on the I-Series. So the business came to me wanting more uptime, because at that point we were doing a full save in production every weekend and taking the machine down, and we were doing backups every night as part of our nightly batch, where they couldn't communicate with the system to do certain things because records would be locked from the backups. So what we did at that time, we didn't have a second system, but we did had already purchased Itera HA. So we replicated to another LPAR on the same system and offloaded our backups to that LPAR. So that made it so we didn't do backups on production anymore. We replicated all of our data, backed it up on a separate system. A later solution, with going hand in hand with partnering with Datanational and Evault, we now have a second system at Datanational in their data center. We replicate real time to that data center, and we do Evault backups, disk-to-disk backup with that backup client to Evault from our I-Series. We still do no backups in production except for during some planned outages like a full PTF load, fixed load. Otherwise, we do not take that machine down, and we do not do backups on the primary. We do it all on our backup machine, and it's been a great solution. Haven't had any problems with it. Our DR tests have all been successful as far as the I-Series point of view is concerned, and we're moving in that direction on other applications and other platforms.
So it was more of an evolving process, right? So you mentioned logical partition, LPAR. So for the folks that are not familiar with the I-Series world, that's a VM. It's a separate instance that would run physically on the same box. It's encapsulated, running its separate operating system and having separate hardware features. So you started out with that, and then eventually was more concerned with, okay, now we took care of uptime and have our backups offloaded to a second instance, but now it's running on the same physical hardware. So let's look at, the second step of that whole process for you guys was to move that second environment off-site.
Yeah, so with the original or first option there, the first step, we still had to have another DR solution. So at that point in time, we had another vendor where we just took tapes to and restored to their machine in the event of a disaster. So we would have about 30 hours of downtime to restore, plus whatever, travel and getting everything lined up. And of course, more data loss than that. So now when our lease of our box was up, we leased two boxes, one a CBU, which is a way of licensing things cheaper through IBM to get a second box. And we went that route with the Datanational's help and the Evault solution.
Great. Okay, so moving on to our next slide here. So matching requirements with solutions. So this is where, okay, you've done your homework, you got everything outlined, you understand what your needs are. Now it's time to kind of jump in the pool of different options out there, and there are a ton. So depending on your operating system platform, in some environments it's more limited, I would say. But if you're a straight Windows shop, there's lots of different options out there. Not only from a technology standpoint, but also in how these are delivered to you, right? So you can now, the way that the marketplace is set up, you can now look at things from not only from a technology standpoint, but also financially, how you want to go about cost justifying these. Do you want this as a capital expense, or where you're making some upfront investment, or is your organization more likely to like operational spend, where it's more of a monthly spend for you? More times than not, in our environment that we work with our customers for DR and business continuity, customers like the fact that they can subscribe to a service and not have any investment in redundant infrastructure, or have to invest in a second data center or any of that. They simply want to subscribe to a monthly service and have all those components, all that services, all the upkeep of that be maintained for that monthly payment. So some of the larger organizations that have larger staffs that may have multiple data centers throughout their enterprise, that's a no-brainer for them. They have the resources, they have the infrastructure already built in, so they may want to do something that's on-premise within their enterprise. They have the support staff to properly maintain that. So lots of, not only from different technology and in a way that those can be delivered, and sometimes it's a hybrid. Sometimes a combination of when you get into some of the larger capacities, I know on the backup side, if you get into the 20 to 30 to 40, 50 terabytes of capacity that you may need to properly back up your environment, a lot of times at that clip level, it makes no sense to go with a cloud-based solution. That's just too much from a service provider model. It makes a lot more sense to have that as a capital expense, and maybe have your solution provider maintain that or manage that for you to help lower your costs. So we've seen that a lot. So just to address some of the things on here, we see some of these solutions pop up that make sense for a lot of our customers. We're kind of biased as a company. We like a lot of software-based replication solutions just because they seem to be a little more turnkey, and they don't have a ton of maintenance, and the care and feeding of those types of solutions are a lot less, it seems anyways, based on our experience in some of the hardware-based replication solutions. That could just be from our exposure and from our environment, but there's lots of different options out there in terms of SAN-to-SAN replication. If you're looking for something for HA or DR, that's a fantastic approach to use, where you have multiple SANs that are in sync with one another. And I've seen this work out very well in campus-like environments. So if you're a larger organization that maybe have a campus with data centers in multiple buildings, this seems to be a real nice solution for that. The replication traffic seems to be a little bit heavier depending on what you're using for that SAN, depending on if there's compression going on or deduplication or whatnot. But we see the traffic would be a little bit heavier on that. And when you're looking at things from a backup perspective, the SAN-to-SAN replication doesn't really give you the backup capabilities, the point-in-time backup capabilities, unless it's got some built-in continuous data protection. So I'm speaking broad here because there's lots of different options for a SAN replication capability. So cloud vendors. So a great option to take a look at if you want hassle-free and to have somebody that's experienced to support you from a cloud perspective. That's a great way to go. Operational spend. You do need to take your time and understand the technology that they're using to provide that cloud service. Also, there's lots of things that go into researching the company. And actually, we're probably going to be hosting another webinar here in the next month or two talking about some of the considerations when evaluating cloud-based solutions. So you need to look at the support structure of that organization. Make sure it's not 2 or 3 guys working in an office somewhere that's supporting your environment, that they have world-class support, 24/7 availability. You need to take a look at the physical controls of their environment. So a lot of times we do play in the cloud space as a consultant. A lot of times we have customers visit our facilities. They want to come in to our buildings and look around and just make sure that we are who we say we are. So there's a lot of that comes into play there. Even from a security standpoint, making sure that their encryption technology is on par and it's going to meet your needs. Whether you're looking for, if you do any work for the government, you're going to need 256-bit encryption. You need that encryption layer if you're doing any type of HIPAA compliance or FERPA compliance. Those are all the things that you need to take a look at. From a disk-to-disk backup perspective, we're kind of biased because we are partners with Evault, but there's lots of backup technology out there to take a look at. So whenever you can take advantage of eliminating your dependency on tape and implement a disk-to-disk architecture, you're going to be in a lot better position from a recovery time. So there's lots of good options out there to consider. It's just a matter of doing your homework and understanding what's going to work for your platform support. It's very nice that a lot of these solutions like Evault give you cross-platform capability. So it's one solution that can support all the major OS levels, so you're not having to dip into 4 or 5 different solutions based on your OS platform. So we've seen it where a customer may have something specific for their virtual environment, something specific for their physical environment. They may have some Linux servers in another environment, in another data center that they're trying to provide support for. So very nice from that point of view. So from a requirement standpoint, Randy, I know that you mentioned a little bit about this already, but you guys were looking for something that offered real-time replication. I know that you've probably taken your assessment and doing some homework there. I don't know if you could maybe share your experience in going through that process with everyone on the line today.
Well, I mean, we worked hand in hand with you guys at Datanational, with Derrick and other people there, to evaluate different products and come up with a solution for our environment, which I think is a very good solution. We went with Itera HA for the replication, and at the time when we started doing that, it was when Itera was one of the few replication tools that used what's called remote journaling on the eye. So it was a thinner product, a faster performing product at the time, and it's still a very good product, and the company that owns it is updating it all the time and updating the other products they own, Mimics, which some customers would have heard of that work on the eye. Also, the solution of the Evault backups. We run an Evault backup appliance that is actually Datanational owns. We rent space and they support it for us. It makes a copy there and it sends a copy off-site to another location. So we have those 2 copies that I spoke of earlier. Also, like I said, it's always a good practice to shut down your application if you're going to be making major changes, so you don't have the risk of corrupting things on both sides. As far as our RTO, RPOs, we took care of that with the solution. Takes half hour maybe to swap, and the data's real time. Even when we do backups on that backup machine or run our nightly process, we're still sending the data to that backup machine. We may not apply it during those backups because we want a point-in-time backup, but after those backups are done, then it applies all the changes, but they are off-site at that location, pretty much real time.
So one of the things, Randy, that we hear a lot from customers too is that they start out by thinking that there's going to be one strategy that's going to work for everything.
Yeah.
So I think you guys kind of learned that there's no way it's going to be, it doesn't make sense for your organization. You have different systems that don't require immediate uptime. Yeah, and different operating system platforms.
Yep. So the other platforms are actually moving the direction that we already moved on the eye, and we've been there on the eye for 3 or 4 years now. But they're looking at other technologies to do it, other backup technologies, other replication tools. So that's all in progress right now. For me, lucky one, I already did it all. So for us, I mean, we might move things or change things a little bit, but the solution's really set and working very well.
That's great. So one of the things, one of the questions that we got is talking about Fema Zones. So, and this is a question that I get a lot when I do different conferences. And the question is really, do you see customers focus on being in different Fema Zones? And I've been maybe asked that maybe a handful of times, and typically it's customers that are in those areas that are more prone to natural disasters, like the coastal type cities. The requirement that I see the most often coming up is power grids. Being on different power grids is a big one. And there's actually a website out there. I can maybe do a follow-up that gives you, it lays out the U.S. power grid. So you can actually see where your facilities are, what power grids that they're in, and you can try to figure out, okay, if you want to have your HA or DR environment in a different power grid, you have that capability. If you just search on Google, I'm sure you could find it. Was the Fema zone requirement ever something that you guys looked at, Randy, or was it just you know?
Yeah, we not really. We consider more the power grid, I think, and just overall being, you know, a greater distance away as being something we look at. So
right.
Not just power, but if you had a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, or something, you don't want, of course, both your facilities wiped out at the same time.
Right.
Especially once you rely on replication, having a second machine and not doing save restores to a different location.
Right. Okay, so that is the content that I had planned to deliver, that Randy and I planned on deliver. I do have a couple questions here that are focused in on certain things that was mentioned, and one of them was, if I can translate this correctly, to elaborate on the licensing on the HA side. So I'll take a stab at it, and Randy, you can chime in too. So I think what we see is that customers don't necessarily want to invest in HA licensing. So for example, you know, let's say you run an ERP package on your system, Microsoft Dynamics or something along those lines, SAP. So let's say you have a DR environment or HA environment, and a lot of times customers will not license that second instance of the software, or maybe they'll license the mission critical function of it, but some of the third-party software tools, what they'll do is they'll replicate the data over to that secondary system, and if they have an outage, they know it's part of their documented disaster recovery plan. So all this, we didn't really touch about the, you know, creating a plan. So all this once you have a solution in place, you need to document a plan that walks you through, okay, here's how this solution works, here's how the replication works, here's what you need to do within the software, and there's tons of other things that go on above and beyond just the software. There's DNS updates, there's all these things that go into recovering from an outage. But from a software perspective, what a lot of our customers do is they call their provider, they call their support line and say, we have an outage, we need to transfer our production license over to this new box, or they get a temp key, and those temp keys can be used in outages or disaster recovery testing. So Randy, you mentioned that it sounds like you guys are doing something very similar with that.
So you know, if the question was regarding the I series specifically, then I mentioned the CBU box where, you know, IBM allows you to buy licenses for multi-processors, but you only have to buy the one, and the other ones in the event of a disaster will transfer from your primary machine. I also mentioned that we buy ones for critical applications, and ones that aren't as critical, we do what you said, where we call the vendor and say, we need a transfer, we had a disaster. I would also say if you have the critical ones like we do, where we want them up and running immediately, that you push back when you get the quotes from your vendors. You know, a lot of vendors will lower prices for you for DR or HA if they haven't already, and you can usually get them to lower it more because, you know, they're looking at it as another license and more maintenance, you know, fees coming in. So they may be willing to haggle with you, and you might be able to get the price down as well.
Right. No, that's great feedback. The next question I have is, we currently use tape backups and travel to a recovery center for DR purposes, and now we have an RTO of 24 hours or less. Any suggestions? So, you know, it's a good question. So there's lots of different tools and utilities that you can use. Right off the bat, with being a tape-based solution, you can eliminate that by looking at a disk-to-disk backup solution, and maybe partner with a provider that not only offers that backup solution as a cloud service, but also has the resources to recover your data too. So not only are they providing the cloud space to you for backups, but they're also providing the recovery resources for you in event of an outage. So that would be a good place to start in taking a look at that. And one of the things that you should look at in terms of cloud providers, and I talked a little bit about that, but make sure your cloud providers have some type of technical knowledge on the applications that you run. So if you're running, I mentioned SAP or Microsoft Dynamics, make sure they have folks on staff that have some resources, some skill sets, because a lot of times in an event, you need maybe an extra hand there in being a little more intimate with the recovery process, and someone that has the knowledge that supports that software that you're trying to recover from. So a lot of times that is a huge thing when we are being graded by our potential clients in understanding what we have expertise in and what we don't have expertise in. So that would be my first suggestion there, to eliminate that tape. So whenever you can eliminate that tape process, and you're having to get in the car and put a tape in the car and travel, and it could be in an airplane, depending on where your recovery center is. If you go to a disk-to-disk architecture and subscribe to maybe a business partner's cloud, you really eliminate that whole travel expense, that whole travel time, and you're just basically calling him and declaring an outage, and they can initiate that restore right away. And the nice thing is you can start moving on to steps 3, 4, 5 in your DR plan and really eliminate that whole commute time. So that would be my suggestion there. That was the last question I had in the question box here. So I appreciate everyone taking the time today. We went a little over our time. I appreciate staying with us here. Our contact information is there. Feel free to contact Randy or myself if you have any specific questions. Randy's got a wealth of experience and knowledge, and he can kind of share with you what they've done there at their organization. So I appreciate everyone taking the time this afternoon. Thank you, and see you soon. Take care now.
Bye.